Welcome back. Two Kings of the North, Doug Lesmerises and Bill Landis. Good to be with you folks here on a Monday. I'm dragging a little bit, Landis, I'll be honest. Kind of a long week.
Yeah, you sound like a man who was in his car for 10 hours yesterday.
Yeah. So it was like two late night Iowa games on Friday and Saturday, one at Iowa State, and like 24 hours of driving round trip between going to all the games and back and forth. So I'm dragging a little bit, but it's a great Monday for Northern football, right? So we're here to celebrate Northern football. We got fired coaches to talk about. We got a playoff field to set. And listen, like we're not going to break news about the playoff field here, but we want to have the conversation with you so you can have it with us that everybody else is having, and just make sure we're all on the same page with this stuff. And then we talked about it a little bit on the Saturday night show. I just want to make sure we talk about it here. I just went through all the Northern teams and how they finished in the second half of the season, Bill. Because when you have a good first half, BYU, Pitt, Iowa State, right? It's like, man, you really get a lot of attention. But if you start off slow and then finish strong and your record overall isn't great, sometimes you don't get the credit. But I just want to make sure we talk about teams, again, that I just am really impressed with, who didn't give up. Yeah, and maybe they're not in the playoff picture, but I want to make sure we give them some credit. So we'll do that in the back half of the show.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that. And I was peeking ahead at some bowl projections too, getting a little fired up about some of the potential matchups you might have for some of those teams when it comes to those teams playing SEC teams. So
yeah. We want to make fun of Bama for being in the Cheez-It Bowl, but we don't want to act like the Cheez-It Bowl's not cool. And then we'll do Cram-o-Meter. And I will say, as I was driving back from Ames, Iowa, I sound worse than I thought I was going to sound. I didn't realize it was going to be quite this bad. When I was driving back from Ames, Iowa to Columbus, Ohio on Sunday night, Brett Bielema put out a tweet, and I was driving right past Champaign, Illinois. And I thought, I bet you I can find his address. And should I go to his house and knock on the door and take a selfie and thank him for being a true Northern King? And I probably should have done it. Isn't it disappointing that I didn't try?
Well, I'm glad that you're not in a Champaign jail cell right now. I like the idea. The execution maybe would have been difficult.
Like, usually you can't just, it's not like millionaire head coaches just have their address in the phone book, but usually if you pay for like one of the fine people things, you can get them.
I mean, yeah, and usually when someone buys a house for north of $1 million, you can probably figure that out. Yeah,
they're not in witness protection. And if I would have shown up and been like, Brett, Doug, Kings of the North, I just want to say, you are a true King of the North. Would he have been mad? Would he have been mad? He probably just would have been like hanging out in his pajamas watching a movie, right? Like, he would have accepted that.
I don't know. Is he might be a shotgun by the door kind of guy, though.
Oh, yeah, he did live in Arkansas for a while. Okay. Anyway, Doug's in jail. So that so I like that you said a Champaign jail, not a Champaign morgue. So instead, I'm here, and we want to talk about first the two coaching changes that were made, and one other coaching change that Bill Landis called. That Bill Landis, like, you have been all over this, and we'll get to it because it does affect the North. But I want to ask about possibly starting a new tradition here on Kings of the North, and I do have the West Virginia banner, and I have the Purdue banner.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a lighter. And I'm wondering if the tradition should be, if you fire your coach, we burn your banner and order a new one to signify the cleansing of the program. I also live within walking distance of a pond. So if you don't want me to burn the banner right now, I could go build a wooden raft, set the banners on fire, and push them out into the pond later today, if that would be more cinematic.
I like Viking funeral. I don't like set off the smoke detectors in your home while we're doing a show.
Okay. Yeah. That's why you're here. You're the chief content officer. Don't play with lighters. This is one of those, usually I go downstairs 10 minutes before the show and ask my wife to print out the rundown for me. And today I went downstairs 10 minutes before the show and said, do we have a lighter? And she's just like, what is going on up there? So I didn't want to put them up behind us, but we acknowledge the changing of the guard, the passing of the torch, and let's talk. And listen, when we had Stephen Godfrey on the show a couple weeks ago, I mean, we have him every other week. He's like a big talk to agents, know what's up in the coaching thing. And these were the only two, Bill, right? Of our 28 Northern teams, these were the only two. Now there could be a third, but these were the only two at the moment to talk about, and they both happened. Are you surprised, or did you sort of expect that Neal Brown at West Virginia and Ryan Walters at Purdue would be fired?
Yeah, I'm not surprised. Certainly not surprised by the Ryan Walters thing. You know, we've been talking about that one for a while. I always thought that was sort of going to happen by the end of the year. It did feel like Neal Brown kind of swung back and forth, but then when West Virginia loses the way it lost to Texas Tech to end the season, that felt like some finality there too. So I'm not surprised by either of these moves. I guess it is a little odd though for West Virginia to be firing its coach while it prepares to play in a bowl game, but it's not the first time that's happened.
Not the first time. I just think the way, like the momentum, right? And momentum does matter at the end of the year. There's been, and again, we just want to acknowledge that we're never going to pretend here that we are the utmost authorities on the inner workings of all 28 of our Northern college football programs. So there's a lot of great local reporting that goes on, and we hope you guys who really care about those teams do support that good local reporting. But it certainly feels like reading some of the stuff around Purdue that maybe the 66-0 against Indiana pushed the Purdue decision over the edge that maybe wouldn't have been there otherwise. Yeah,
I think so. If Purdue had managed to be competitive there, then maybe this goes differently. I was also, you mentioned Godfrey. I was listening to him on Split Zone Duo this morning. He was talking about the situation, and he said that the Purdue brass was giving Ryan Walters the opportunity to kind of like shop around to find the good offensive coordinator to get that offense headed in the back direction, and I think was met with not a lot of enthusiasm as he was shopping that opportunity around. So that also obviously did not end in his favor.
Okay, let's start with West Virginia though. West Virginia finishes 6-6. They did go 3-3, so they just kind of had the same season the whole time, but got the doors blown off in their season finale at Texas Tech. 37-35 in 6 seasons for Neal Brown. Seemed like a very reasonable hire, like a lower level guy on his way up with some offensive acumen, right? Like you understand why West Virginia went where it went with Neal Brown, but West Virginia should be better than this. And again, I think a very difficult thing for a program is to act like it has higher standards than history and commitment would show that the actual standards should be. But I don't think that's the case here at West Virginia. I don't think West Virginia should be satisfied with 37-35. I mean, of course, that's saying the Raspy Boys kids, my guys like that. Of course, this is a better program than 37-35. And so, and then just the absolute crushing vibes around the program, I think necessitated this. But this is a proud football program with great tradition that I think in the Big 12, when you look, Bill, at what the Big 12 is right now, where BYU, Arizona State, Iowa State, and Colorado tied for first place in that conference, I don't think there's anything that those 4 programs are doing that West Virginia can't do and shouldn't aspire to do immediately with this new hire.
I agree. And you can't, West Virginia should not be and it's weird, like say middle of the pack in the Big 12, like everybody kind of had the same record, but they did finish in the middle of the Big 12 standings, and the Big 12 that doesn't have Texas or Oklahoma in it anymore. And you should absolutely aim higher than that if you're West Virginia. And that was probably the most disheartening thing of all this, right? Is that there's a surprising 9-4 last year, and then you bring back so much from that team into a new Big 12 where you think like we got a chance to be competitive in this conference now. And then you kind of fall on your face and you finish 6-6. So it didn't help Neal Brown at all that as the landscape changed and he brought a pretty compelling roster into that new landscape, like they did not sustain the success of last year. And then it just turns out that last year was kind of a temporary spike, I guess. Like he's 6-4, 6-7, 5-7, 9-4, and then back down to 6-6. And that's not sustainable, nor should it be accepted at West Virginia.
Yeah. 2 winning seasons out of 6. Dana Holgorsen had 7 winning seasons out of 8, right? And like context changes, but I like that. Again, this is I don't know, man. Rich Rod was really good. Bill Stewart kept it going. I mean, this is a program, and we understand you change conference. This is a program that like should be aspiring for 8, 9, 10 wins, right? So, and again, when you take Oklahoma and Texas out of the Big 12, I don't know that there's anything standing in West Virginia's way. Do you think they can like flip this pretty quick?
Yeah, it's off the top of my head, it's a fairly older roster, right? So there's some retooling that'll have to happen there, but I think the nature of the Big 12 is that anyone can turn it probably pretty quickly if you do the right job in the offseason, right? So yeah, I think they could. And they're 6-6. It's not like they're coming off of a 2-10 season.
Right. Exactly. So yeah, how do you turn 6-6? By winning 8 or 9 games. Yeah, no, that's a very good point. Can I talk about what I think are the 4 good types of hires that you can make now in college football? And then there's one type of hire that I think is pretty much kind of bad. And there is a guy who would fit the bad category for West Virginia. All right. So, and this is all based on like what just happened in the sport, right? So one kind of good hire is up and coming young assistant that you take a swing on, right? And there's no guarantees, but you try to get this guy before he's so good, maybe you couldn't get him anymore. So this is Fran Brown at Syracuse, right? It's also Ryan Walters at Purdue. Ryan Walters was a hot assistant after the way he was coordinating that defense at Illinois a couple of years ago. But like the best version of this with the coaching culture and acumen and belief that Fran Brown brought to Syracuse, to be able to Fran Brown West Virginia would be an amazing thing, would it not? Now, there's risk involved here. There's probably more risk here because how do you really know? But first-time dude certainly can be attractive. So do you believe in this category? What do you think of this category?
Yeah, no, I like the category. The one thing about Fran Brown, and maybe it's like an addendum to the category, it's like rising star assistant. You want to get him before anybody else does, but also has regional ties. Like, is that how important is that? Like that's the secret to the sauce, I think, with Fran Brown's immediate success at Syracuse, is he was able to just get a bunch of guys from Jersey to come with him, either out of high school or transfer portal. And obviously that is not applicable to every program, because there are some areas that are pretty fertile for recruiting and others that aren't. And I would argue that West Virginia is the latter there.
Yeah. So I think that's a point well taken. And I don't know that I have somebody leaping to mind with those ties, right? But yes, I think it is, whatever. It's the chocolate chips and the cookies. Otherwise, it's still a cookie, but there's no chocolate chips in it. All right. Second one is established winner getting his shot, right? Who's been a lower level winner. And this is the Curt Cignetti model. It's the Lance Leipold model. It's the Jim Tressel model. And we'll talk about Casey Keeler getting a job in the North. When we said who could be the next Curt Cignetti a couple of weeks ago, you found Casey Keeler, the former Delaware coach, who now has been winning at Sam Houston State. Curt Cignetti, of course, makes this very attractive, but he's not the only one. And I think this makes a lot of sense. Like, what do you think of this category?
I love this category. You know who would have been a great fit for West Virginia football in this category? Curt Cignetti.
Oh, my God.
But
for real, they're a year late. Yeah,
they're a year late. And also, like, kudos to Indiana for locking them down, because I have no doubt
Pittsburgh ties. Yeah.
He went to West Virginia, didn't he?
Yeah. Oh my God. 20 million and pay the buyout. God. Isn't McAfee saying like, there's an opportunity here? Is that what he's talking about? That they're going to steal Curt Cignetti? I'm sure it's not, but
I don't know what he's alluding to. I think McAfee is pumping up the job as something that is maybe more appealing than the average fan might assume, which I think is true. But I also I question a little bit, like in the NIL world. I don't know what that situation's like. But yeah,
I forgot Curt Cignetti went to West Virginia. I forgot that. Oh my God,
he'd be the prodigal son.
Oh my God. Okay,
maybe he'll take a pay cut. Maybe he'll take a pay cut to come home.
Oh my God. This is the thing. There's a lot. I really believe in that conversation. Like whatever, like the Bear Bryant thing, right? Mama's calling you when Mama calls you home or whatever. Like I think that's a real thing for a lot of people. That's not going to happen here. But a winner, right? a lower level winner. You like that idea anyway. Yes,
I do.
You're in on the category. Okay,
I am in on the category. Yeah.
Okay. Another category to me is veteran head coach who is ready to settle in at a place that means something to him as his final stop. And there is some relief that comes with it. There is opportunity of, I get to run a program my way, but I'm not trying to climb the ladder anymore. I don't want to call it like a retirement program, but like you kind of know what I mean. And this is the Bill O'Brien at Boston College hire that I think has been really good. And it's also what Greg Schiano is doing at Rutgers. And we've talked about those guys a ton, but I think they are in their last jobs, especially if it goes well. And I think they are dedicated to the idea, like they've already been, quote, like a higher level. They both coached in the NFL. And to be able to bring somebody who really cares and has both feet planted, I think there's something to that. Now, there's another category that is the one I really don't like that I think is different than that. But this really is a mindset of a coach who's willing to like embrace the fact that this is the final stop and it's a final stop that means something. What do you think of that category?
I don't mind it. It can be a little flimsy because I know the other category you don't like, and I think you can kind of get to that category rather quickly with this kind of candidate.
Okay. So let me give my last category that I like before we get to the category that I don't like and start assigning people to these categories. The other category to me, it's the Deion Sanders category, which is this guy is going to set the fan base on fire with a high profile, high energy, different kind of way of doing business. And he probably should be famous. And can you get a famous person who the fame is the calling card, but then they also actually know what they're doing? And now I don't have a person like that for West Virginia. And we're each going to have 3 people on our list for each school. I do have a person like that on my list for Purdue. But Deion has created this category. And Deion had no ties to Colorado. So it doesn't have to be a famous person that's linked to your school. And I'm not saying there's a million Deion Sanders out there, but it is a new category that I think is interesting. And if it can happen at Colorado, I think it can happen anywhere. Now, it doesn't mean that there's another Deion out there for sure. But if I was sitting in a room in West Virginia, I would try to be thinking of anybody who maybe would fit this category and might be interested in coming to West Virginia. Maybe the answer would be, we can't think of anybody.
They have to be a coach currently.
So the thing about this that I think we just have to be a little careful about is Deion was a coach, right? Deion, yes. It's not like Deion just came from he didn't just come from Aflac commercials and being a terrific athlete and then start doing this. He actually was coaching. So do they have to be a coach? Man, I don't want to act like any person off the street can just become a coach. But I'd be open-minded. So maybe they don't have to be a coach if you believe that they are a smart CEO and culture builder.
Pat McAfee.
If he was like, oh man, I got a name. And it's like Dick Cheney, run the VP search. The VP is me. Pat McAfee ran the search. Holy moly.
I don't know if he's still coaching, but Pat White was coaching for a while. He was like on the Charger staff, I think.
Okay. Like I'm having the conversation. If I'm on this search committee, the names Pat McAfee and Pat White are coming up in the conversation for me. Would you say that as well?
Yes.
Okay. So now what's the category that I don't like?
Matt Brown.
Okay. So the category that I don't like is former huge profile head coach who you are catching in a net on his way down. That is not, he doesn't have in his head, you know what? I've taken my shot. It's been a good run, but I just really want to settle in somewhere. And finish this out right at a place that I want to help, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's more like, oh man, I got fired from a big job. I'll take any job. So like this is both Charlie Weiss and Les Miles at Kansas.
Yep.
Which Kansas tried this twice and failed before they went the other route, which is let's find an established winner and give him a chance in Lance Leipold. It's like, look at the difference there. So here's where I would slice this, okay?
Mm-hmm.
I think Jimbo Fisher would fit more of the plunging coach on the way down that you're catching in a net before he hits the bottom, even though he has West Virginia ties. I think Rich Rodriguez coming back to be the West Virginia head coach could be more like Bill O'Brien and Greg Schiano. A guy, and it's the Schiano model. I was there, I strived for more, it didn't work out, and now I'm coming back home. I don't know that you could find another theoretical what could be like Schiano model that would fit better than Rich Rodriguez coming back to West Virginia. So Rich Rodriguez, therefore, I am intrigued by because I would put him in that category. Jimbo Fisher and Mac Brown, I am not intrigued by because I would put them in the other category. How would you splice names like that? And you do make a fine point, man. Like you can have a toe over the line from category 1 into category 2 with those.
Yeah, no, I think I'm with you with the way you put those guys into categories. I would be far more interested in Rich Rod than I would be Jimbo Fisher. I guess I don't know how to separate Jimbo Fisher from like the Texas A&M of it all. So maybe there's more to Jimbo that if removed from that situation, he'd be better. But like Rich Rod is still doing it and doing it quite successfully at Jacksonville State. I think it would mean more to him to be in that job than it would be Jimbo. I don't know that Jimbo would look at it as like, I'm the guy who's coming to reinvigorate and save is too strong of a word because it's not like West Virginia's at the bottom, but save West Virginia football. I think he'd be looking at it as a means to go back to where he was previously. And I think Rich Rod would embrace the idea of being the guy who got West Virginia football right before he decided to retire. So I think you're right there. I guess the only thing I said Mac Brown. I'd be worried about that kind of situation. And I know that Mac wasn't coaching, so like Rich Rod has been coaching, and like that's sharp for him. So it's not exactly the same thing, but it is like familiar guy who was here before, who was older, come back and help us, and then like it didn't work at UNC. So
you meant Mac Brown left UNC and came back. I was like, do you want Mac Brown for West Virginia? Do you want Mac Brown for West Virginia? No. Okay.
No. I don't want Mac Brown for West Virginia. I meant it more as like we've had this guy before. Will it be as good the second time around?
So Greg Schiano, would you say Greg Schiano is like the plus side of that, and Mac Brown is the 100% the downside of that?
Yes.
And Mac Brown wasn't a complete and utter disaster. It wasn't great, right? Or do you think Mac Brown was a complete and utter disaster?
No, I mean it was better than he took over for Larry Fedora, right? I guess it was better than Larry Fedora, but it didn't push the program forward the way that I think UNC was hoping for.
Yeah, 6 years at North Carolina, 7-6, 8-4, 6-7, 9-5, 8-5, 6-6. Okay, all right. So listen, again, we're never going to pretend to be something that we're not here. We're just throwing names out. It's just fun. And a lot of the other stuff, there are some people who are really good on the reporting of this, and there are other people who just throw out names to to enhance their relationships with agents, and they say, put my guy's name in the mix here. And so, some of that stuff, that's not telling you anything more than what we're just doing here, just having a good time throwing out names. Yeah. So we're going to have 3 names each for each of us for these jobs. Who are your 3 West Virginia names?
My 3 names are Barry Odom, who is the current UNLV head coach, who has a relationship with the current West Virginia AD Ren Baker. He's just a good coach, I think. I thought he was good at Mizzou, and like he got fired, but he was like 500 at Mizzou. He's been very good at UNLV. I think he makes interesting hires. I think he understands, like as a defensive coach, what a college football offense needs to look like. UNLV plays awesome special teams. I just think he's very solid. Charles Huff, the current Marshall head coach, who again I just think is pretty good, 31-20 at Marshall. Very clearly trying to leave Marshall. He's been linked to like the Southern Miss job, former Penn State, former Alabama assistant. He's from Maryland. He has serious recruiting chops, but I also think the recruiting ties. that would matter to a place like West Virginia. And then the last one is a little more off the radar. It's Terry Smith. He is I think he's the associate head coach and cornerbacks coach at Penn State, Pittsburgh high school coach. Has been at Penn State for a long time, has worked with James Franklin for a while. He was somebody that I actually thought Temple should take a look at because he recruits Pittsburgh and Philadelphia very well. Those are two areas that I think are actually pretty important to West Virginia if you look at their recruiting classes their last couple of years. So this is like a recruiting familiarity, but also I just think like a good football coach has done a tremendous job with his position at Penn State who might be ready for a step up into a head coaching job, but he has no head coaching experience at the college level. He's only ever been a high school head coach.
Okay. That's more of a Fran Brown category, like catch a guy who's never had a shot like this before. So,
yeah, he's older though. He's 55.
Okay. Good list. There might be a name on your list that appears on one of my other lists. Here's my West Virginia list. My West Virginia list does start with Rich Rodriguez. So I really could get behind this for the reasons that we already entailed. Number 2 is Andy Kotelnicki that I don't. So this is one of those. Penn State, I think, would absolutely fight to keep him. But if Andy Kotelnicki is going to leave, I hope he doesn't leave for a job in the South, and that he's coming out of the Big 12 with Kansas, right? And now he's had a year at Penn State. I just think he could check some boxes here, and I think he has a good kind of upbeat energy in addition to being a good offensive schemer. So I actually think that could be a really good hire for West Virginia. And then the third name I have is Tony White, who is the defensive coordinator at Nebraska and was the defensive coordinator at Syracuse before that. You said there's a report out there that he might be leaving to go be the DC at Florida State. Is that correct?
Yeah, Pete Thamel reported that this morning, that they're in talks. Nothing has been finalized as of us recording this very moment, but yeah, talking about it.
So, I mean, a guy, right? Syracuse and Nebraska, those are two interesting places to be that I think could prepare you for West Virginia. And then it's just one of those, again, if you're going from an offensive head coach, do you want to go to a defensive head coach? And I think this is a guy, and this is one of those, I mean, if you offer him a head coaching job, you can throw your body in front of Florida State, throwing money at him to be the DC. So sure. You did better research than I did. What do you think of my 3 names?
I like them. Tony White is not one that I considered. Rich, yeah. When I actually hadn't even thought of Rich Rod. Like we were like theorizing a while ago about like Jimbo Fisher and Nick Saban. It never even crossed my mind that Rich Rodriguez was still coaching until like 2 days ago. So I don't mind that one at all. I think Andy Kotelnicki makes sense, and they said he's interviewing for that, right? Or at least has some conversations about that job. There were some reports on that.
Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, then I think if you want to pivot to defense and hire a pretty well thought of defensive coordinator, you could do a lot worse than Tony White. So he's had really good defenses at Syracuse and Nebraska. Okay.
Let's shift to Purdue. What do you think is a better job, Purdue or West Virginia?
West Virginia.
Okay. That's what I thought too. Purdue fires Ryan Walters. It kind of just had to be done. Tough spot again. This is one of those, which does affect the view of Ryan Walters. He wasn't taken over. I mean, he was taking over a good program. Jeff Brom left because Purdue was so good, and he went home to Louisville. Like, this was not, oh my God, after Darrell Hazel or something, like, this program's at the bottom, and now it is at the bottom. So, and just the contrast with Indiana. Do you think that kind of stuff matters? Like within a state, when you have 2 programs like that, and one is doing so well and one is doing so bad, that if Curt Cignetti had gone 6-6 this year, I think it would have enhanced Ryan Walters' chances of keeping his job.
Yeah, I think it definitely would have. And I think that, and I think it also maybe impacts the way people will view this opening, because they'll want to know, what is Purdue committed to doing to remain competitive with Indiana? And all, like, not only did Curt Cignetti get paid, he got money for his staff. There's an NIL commitment there. And that is the program that you're going to be most often compared to. So you have to make sure that you're walking into a situation that allows you to be competitive with Indiana.
So could this be true, that when you have Indiana's success made it harder for Ryan Walters to keep his job? And I'll be curious which way you mean by this now. But Curt Cignetti's success could make Purdue more attractive, because you have an example of, this is what it takes. They did it, and Purdue's going to be like, well, we're going to have to say we're going to do that. So we're gonna have to put resources on the table to impress any candidates, because we can't just cede the entire state to Indiana. And if you're thinking about Purdue and Purdue says everything Indiana did with Cignetti, we're going to do that, then it's like, wow, I think this is a pretty good job.
I don't know if it's apples to apples, because
Okay.
I'm assuming that Indiana has a much larger alumni / donor base than Purdue has, especially for football.
Okay.
So, and you also, Curt Cignetti was able to put some rocket fuel on the rebuild by bringing all the best players from his James Madison team with him too. Like, does the next Purdue head coach have that in his back pocket as well?
So I don't know, just hire a coach who had a good year and promises to bring 12 players with him, right?
Yeah, you can just hire Bob Chesney, who replaced Curt Cignetti at James Madison, and have Bob Chesney bring the rest of the James Madison roster to Purdue.
And then it's like those guys will really have a chip on their shoulder, because it'll be like, well, Cignetti didn't take us, but now we're going to Purdue to beat Cignetti. That would be really interesting. What's your list for Purdue?
Number one for me is Will Stein, because Will Stein is Jeff Brom. They both went to Trinity High School in Louisville. They both were Louisville quarterbacks. They're both offensive-leaning coaches.
How much time did you spend on your lists? 9 hours? That is an unbelievable name. I spent 9 minutes. I made my lists in the shower this morning. My God, Will Stein is a great name.
Yeah, I mean, he's 35, and he can probably wait it out if he wanted to. And Jeff Brom was a head coach at Western Kentucky before he became the head coach at Purdue. Will Stein is still on his way up. He was the offensive coordinator at Texas El Paso. Is that where he was before Oregon? But he's among the hottest offensive coordinator names in the country, and it just so happens that he shares a background with the last very successful coach at Purdue. I think it's got to be an offensive guy. I think that is Purdue's identity. Purdue's identity is Joe Tiller and Jeff Brom, and you need to go back to that. And Will Stein would be a heck of a way to do it.
Are you going to leave this podcast to go run a search committee? Because also the last Oregon Will Stein replaced Kenny Dillingham, because Kenny Dillingham left Oregon to go be the head coach at Arizona State. He's the youngest head coach in FBS, and he has his team on the edge of making the playoff.
He does.
So Will Stein is half Jeff Brom, half Kenny Dillingham.
Yeah.
And it is an antidote to Curt Cignetti, right? Mm-hmm. That it's like this is a Fran Brown box, right? This is a Kenny Dillingham box. Young, never been a head coach before, but let's go. And did you just go through, was this a Siri search? Siri, please find all FBS coordinators who went to high school within 300 miles of West Lafayette, Indiana.
No.
I can't believe you.
No, I did not do that.
Will Stein's getting the job. Shut the show down. Mike, I don't show my list. My list is embarrassing. Will Stein, my God, this is good.
I just remember when Oregon played Purdue, they were talking a lot about how Will Stein was at Lake Travis High School, where Hudson Card played high school football. Okay. And I think they overlapped there. So I remembered that. And then I had no idea that Will Stein and Jeff Brom also went to the same high school. But I guess there's kind of one good high school football program in Louisville. So maybe that's not surprising. But anyway, Will Stein's number one. A guy we've talked about for this job in the past, Jeff Monken, is number two.
Yeah.
Just like a serious football coach and a program builder. He was good at Georgia Southern. He's been great at Army. Anyone who would bristle at the idea of bringing a service academy coach to a program like this, I implore you to go look at what San Jose State has done with Ken Niumatalolo this year. They're fifth in the country in passing offense and have a Biletnikoff Award finalist. Like, Jeff Monken will figure it out. He doesn't have to run the triple option. The only thing with him is that he has no experience working the portal, because Army can't do that. I think he'd figure that out too, but it is. I think it would be a reasonable pushback on that hire.
But this is a Cignetti box hire. This is an established winner at a lower level.
Yeah, and then the last one for me is Jamarcus Shepard, who is the current Alabama co-offensive coordinator and receivers coach. He was the receivers coach at Purdue for Jeff Brom. He recruited Rondell Moore and David Bell to Purdue. Then he left to go work with Kalen DeBoer at Washington and Alabama. He's 41. He's from Fort Wayne. I think he'd bring some juice. I think he'd bring some fun offense, and I think he'd recruit his butt off.
So these are two Fran Browns and Cignetti. Mm-hmm. So two young assistants with some ties who've never been a head coach before and an established winner at a lower level. Bill Landis. I mean, for real. Search firms, are you kidding me? Search firms don't. You did in 45 minutes what search firms charge $2 million for. What a freaking joke. Don't leave me. Don't leave me. Please don't leave me.
We'll have our own. Kings of the what do we call it? Kings of the search firm doesn't have the right ring to it. We'll figure it out.
Yeah. Okay. Here's my stupid list. Actually, my number one is Jeff Monken. So he's from Decatur. That was my research. He's from Decatur, which is near West Lafayette. Number two is Charles Huff. So this is not, I don't, if he's maybe thinking about the Southern Miss job, it's great that he's like in the state of West Virginia right now at Marshall, but I don't know. West Virginia might be a big jump, but Purdue, right? If we think West Virginia is a better job than Purdue, I think Charles Huff at Purdue makes a lot of sense. But here's my swing. This is my famous guy, is Eddie George.
I like that. Yeah.
He's winning at Tennessee State right now. They've had a really successful year. And he's a Big Ten running back. And he's not going to go be like the head coach at Ohio State right away. But if you're talking about, I think the guy currently in the business who's the closest replica of Deion Sanders, it's undoubtedly Eddie George. That he's famous. He's like multifaceted famous too. He didn't play two sports, but he did football on Broadway. Mm-hmm. He's an incredibly accomplished individual. And he played in the Big Ten. And can you imagine if Purdue announced Eddie George as the head coach? Like, can you imagine, like, how excited would the Purdue fan base be? And how much would donations roll in for NIL for Eddie George? And how excited do you think he's not as famous as Deion, but there is a swath of kids, right? Who'd be like, holy moly.
That, and I think maybe even more importantly, a swath of parents in the Midwest who would like be over the moon about Eddie George coming to their house.
Yeah.
to recruit their kid, right?
So I am 1,000% serious about this. Mm-hmm. That this is this is it. And I do think if Deion Sanders can do it, I think Eddie George could do it. I think I was originally like Drew Brees. Right?
I thought when you alluded to a famous person on this list, I thought it was going to be Drew Brees.
But then I pulled myself back and said, well, I want to give a nod to like, you've got to at least coach, right? Mm-hmm. But Eddie George is laying it down, man. So like search of the North, firm of the North. We want to be firm of the North.
Firm of the North.
Yeah. FOTN. FOTN says get Eddie George on the phone and bring him in at least to talk, right? So, all right. I like our list. I really like your. I have seen. I'm sorry. It's Jamarcus Shepard, right? Jamarcus Shepard is the guy.
Yeah.
I had seen that name elsewhere by some people. I don't know that I had seen Will Stein. I think Will Stein is all you.
Yeah, well, I mean, Jamarcus Shepard has the
direct
tie.
Purdue ties. Yeah,
yeah, and he's from Indiana. Will Stein would. That's the kind of thing that we had that conversation about Glenn Schumann at Georgia. It's like he can be pretty patient, I think. So and like Will Stein is not quite as established, but I think he could also be patient, and maybe wait it out for a better job than a Purdue job for his first one. But I don't know. Maybe Jeff Brom can get on the phone and sell the Purdue job to Will Stein.
Yeah. Okay. I like the names. I have the lighter ready. Maybe I'll just roll it up. It's the ceremonial rolling up of the banner.
Roll it up. You're going to smoke the Purdue banner.
And then when they hire somebody, I'll unroll it. So it's like, oh yeah. Take a drag on that. Oh, woo. I'm glad they legalized banner smoking in Ohio, so the cops aren't coming for me anymore. It's like I really needed to get some sleep last night. What'd you do? So I just rolled up the West Virginia banner and went to town on that thing. All right, that's a quick little break here on Kings of the North. We're glad you guys are with us. Oh no, there's not a quick break. Casey Keeler got hired by Temple. Casey Keeler. He sure did. So if he had not already been hired by Temple, I think we would have Casey Keeler on the list for one of these two jobs. Would we not?
We absolutely would have. Yeah. Because he's our guy.
Can you just run through? It felt like there was some specific, like Philly, Delaware things that maybe were in play for Casey Keeler here, who was the longtime coach at Delaware, and to be going back to that area. But just for the people who didn't watch that show, explain why we're so excited about this hire for Temple.
He's a 2-time national champion who's won almost 300 games at Delaware, or Sam Houston State, at Delaware, and at Rowan University in New Jersey. But before that, I get it, like, he's older. He's 65. He is by far the most accomplished football coach that Temple has ever brought in to run that program. It's not even close.
Yeah.
And he does have ties there. I was actually, I didn't bother to go look this up, but I saw one of the sites that covers Temple, might have been owlreport.com, said that there are a lot of former Casey Keeler, Delaware, and Rowan football players who are now coaching high school football in the greater Philadelphia area that might help them get some players to come there too. It's a really hard job. I don't even know if the Temple football program is going to exist in 5 years, because their university president, who used to be at Drexel, wrote an op-ed, I think, for the New York Times like 4 or 5 years ago, saying he was glad that Drexel didn't have football and a bloated athletic budget. And I would guess maybe if he had his way, Temple football would go the same way. But they're keeping the program for now, and they have a local guy who's from Emmaus, Pennsylvania, who I think will take a lot of pride in trying to make that program the best it possibly can be, even though it is a really difficult job. So I like the decision here by Temple. It wasn't on my radar at all, but Casey Keeler now gets to go home and try to make Temple something.
Yeah. We'll make it a goal to get him on the show this offseason.
Yeah.
So this is really good. It's exciting, guys. Give some energy to Temple. And again, like, listen, man, you can flip it quick in the American, right? I mean, if he really does his thing, there's no reason Temple can't be in a conference championship game in 3 years with this guy.
I mean, he took Sam Houston State from FCS to FBS and then went 9-3 in his second year.
Yeah.
And Sam Houston State, as far as I know, doesn't have like tremendous resources compared to the rest of its competition in its league. And Temple definitely does not, but I don't know. It's again, it's like a really kind of hopeless job. I think in a lot of cases they play in an NFL stadium that's practically empty when they play there. Like I get all the challenges, but I don't know. If it was like ever going to work with somebody, it feels like it would be a guy who has a track record like this one, who's from the area, who would care about it.
And again, it's one of those. This just happens to be. I lived in Delaware while all this stuff was happening. He worked the portal already. Casey Keeler, when he was at Delaware, got a Pitt transfer to come to Delaware to play quarterback, whose name was Joe Flacco. Mm-hmm. And like, if you can get a Pitt transfer to come to Delaware 20 years ago, you can find somebody to come play quarterback at Temple who wants a shot to play FBS football and be a starter and play for an established winner. Like, you can do that. They can have a quarterback in 2025 who is better than you would imagine Temple could ever get to play quarterback, who can make an immediate impact. I would actually put that on the list of things I would expect to happen. Okay. Yep. Congratulations to Temple for making the Bill Landis move. Who knows? We got people. You're Philly Billy. That's actually the name of the search firm, the Philly Billy search firm.
Philly Billy search firm.
Yeah. And then, because my name is like way down the list on there.
We specialize in moving people from the Delaware Valley to jobs in the Delaware Valley.
Yeah,
that's all we do.
Yeah. All right, that's it for firing people and hiring people. When we come back, we'll talk about the playoff field, the questions, and some of our answers about what's going to happen with the 12-team playoff next on Kings of the North. Back on Kings of the North, Doug Lesmerises, Bill Landis, producer Mike. Let's talk about the playoff field, Landis, because this affects everybody, not just teams that. Actually, it doesn't affect everybody, because if you're not in the playoff, then it might be, you still care, but your team's not in it. Do we agree that there are 11 teams, 11 slots pretty much taken up in the playoff? Is that universally agreed upon by the college football mafiosa?
Seems to be that way. Yeah. I don't know that I've seen much to the contrary poking around some playoff projections.
Okay. So let's run through just for the people. If you are not constantly doing playoff projections in your own life because you have other things going on, these are the 11 teams that almost everybody agrees are in the playoff. From the Big Ten, Oregon, Penn State, Ohio State, and Indiana. And also from the North, Notre Dame. And Notre Dame's done. They're in. 3 SEC teams, Georgia, Texas, and Tennessee. The Big 12 champ, so either Iowa State or Arizona State, but not 2. It's just going to be the winner. The loser's not going to make the playoff. The ACC champ, which is either SMU or Clemson. And the Group of 5 team, which are we at the point where that's going to be the Mountain West winner?
Yeah.
Do you think
so.
that it's projected to be Boise State? It's been that way the whole year, but Boise State is playing UNLV. And if UNLV wins, we do not think that, for instance, the winner of Army-Tulane in the American would get in ahead of UNLV, not when Tulane just lost to Memphis, right?
Yeah, not after that game. I think if Tulane would have won that game, then I think it's a conversation, but not after that.
Yeah. Okay. So those are the 11, and Oregon is playing Penn State in the Big Ten championship. Georgia is playing Texas in the SEC championship, but win or lose, those 4 teams are in. And we'll talk later in the week. We'll do big game breakdowns on the games that really matter here. So those are the 11. So then there's one spot left that is up for grabs. And there are a handful of teams in contention for that spot. Do you agree that if Clemson loses the ACC championship game, they're out?
Yes. Yeah.
So then there's 2 ACC teams that would be in the mix. It's 10-2 Miami, who blew a chance to be in the title game by losing to Syracuse, and 1-loss SMU. If they lose to Clemson, they are now a 2-loss team and would be in that mix. And then we would say that there are some 3-loss SEC teams that are in the mix here. I actually screwed this up. So it's Alabama, Ole Miss, and South Carolina are the 3 that are really the contenders here. Missouri is also 9-3, but Missouri is not going to get in. It's going to be one of those 3 SEC teams at 9-3. So my guess here, Landis, would be that if SMU loses a competitive game, do you think SMU would be the team that would get in, or no?
Yes.
Okay. I kind of think that too. And then but all of this is, we're just not the show to analyze this because I don't freaking care.
Yeah. I think I would have a very hard time seeing them leaving the team with 11 wins out of the playoff, a power conference team with 11 wins out of the playoff, which would be SMU if it were to lose to Clemson. I think there's some compelling conversation, if you'd like to have it, about Miami and Alabama and probably Ole Miss. Missouri, as you said, is I don't think part of the conversation. South Carolina has the same record and is very hot, but it also lost to Alabama and Ole Miss. So I don't even know if it's actually part of that conversation too. I think it's really SMU, Miami, Alabama, Ole Miss. Who do you like? And I think in that case, I would have a very hard time seeing them leave the 11-win team out.
Yeah, but I'm just not going to get wound up about it, and we're certainly not going to be wound up about a 3-loss team getting in when it's in competition with the 2-loss team who maybe doesn't have. It's just the thing that got me riled up about all this stuff was when they were yahoos talking about a 3-loss SEC team versus 11-1 Indiana. And that's just a conversation that makes me want to hit people on the head with a boat oar. Like, what are you talking about? Like, it's, I said there's a game that we could play maybe on the show called Troll, Honk, or Moron. That are you saying something because you're just trying to get smart people riled up? Or are you saying it because you're incredibly biased? Or are you saying it because you actually believe it because you're stupid? So troll, honk, or moron. And I think we could show tweets from national and SEC people who say ridiculous things and then try to play troll, honk, or moron. Would you like to maybe make that an off-season game?
We can do it. It seems like it's going to be pretty tough, though, to differentiate between those 3.
Yeah. But we constantly, all of the above would always be an option, right? Like,
yeah.
They're not... But sometimes I'm super fascinated by, do you actually mean this? because what you're saying doesn't make sense to a thinking human being. So, okay. So that's the playoff sort of race. There's 11 spots, and then there's like 5 teams for one more spot. Let's talk about some of the questions that remain for the playoff, though. And I think the main one for us in the North, because again, we're just in the handle your business situation, right? So Ohio State did not handle its business against Michigan. Michigan handled its business against Ohio State, but Ohio State, has 2 wins over playoff teams. They handled their business certainly in other ways this season that absolutely has them in the playoff. So the thing that really matters for the North right now is who's going to get the home games in the first round.
Yeah.
And are you pretty sure that we're going to have 3 home games in the North in round 1?
That would be the Big Ten loser, Notre Dame. No, I'm not pretty sure. I guess I'm pretty sure. I'm not 100% confident, but I'm pretty sure.
Okay. Yeah. So my guess would be that it will be the Big Ten loser, the SEC loser, Notre Dame, and Ohio State will be the teams that will host, would be my guess right now. So then again, we'll get into some seeding stuff during the course of the week. I do think one of the seeding questions is Penn State versus Ohio State. Making it if Oregon loses to Penn State in the Big Ten title game, Oregon's the 5 seed, no doubt about it. And then Penn State is either the 1 or 2 seed. If Oregon, who is favored over Penn State, wins, then it becomes a question of 11-2 Penn State versus 10-2 Ohio State when Ohio State has the head-to-head win. And that would matter for, who's the 6, who's the 7, who's the 8. Like, it would matter. What do you think of that decision? I don't know that we need to be definitive on a Monday about it, but do you believe it's at least a conversation in the committee room rather than just saying, well, Penn State made the Big Ten title game and Ohio State didn't. Penn State should be the higher seed.
Yeah, I think it's a conversation. Like, I would land on the side of Ohio State should be higher because Ohio State has the head-to-head win and it has the win over Indiana, and Penn State just doesn't have really. Penn State has Illinois, I guess, as its best win, and its second best win is probably Minnesota, a game that it won by a point on the road. So I think that's pretty cut and dry. But we've also been going through the last few weeks where the committee has had Texas ranked a few spots ahead of Georgia, because Georgia has 2 losses and Texas has 1, and Georgia beat Texas more convincingly than Ohio State beat Penn State. So that's in my mind too. I think we could see a case where maybe in these next rankings that'll come out tomorrow night, that Penn State might move ahead of Ohio State, but then if Penn State takes that second loss, they will then reevaluate and favor the head-to-head and put Ohio State back ahead of them.
I don't think losing in a conference championship game should punish you, but I don't know that I would view Ohio State being ranked ahead of Penn State in that situation as punishment, right? It's that, well, we're taking a head-to-head into account. Now, the thing, if you don't, because I sort of would think about conference championship losses as like half a loss. So it's like, okay, Penn State has 1.5 losses and Ohio State has 2 losses. But then you bring a head-to-head in, and that evens it out a little bit. So I would not get super wound up about it either way. The only way that I really might get wound up about it is if like Penn State wound up as a 9 and didn't get a home game. But if it's a difference between somebody being a 7 or an 8, and you could go either way, I'm interested in it, but I don't know that it's an end-all, be-all discussion.
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah.
All right. Another one that I think matters beyond the Ohio State versus Penn State is Ohio State versus Tennessee. And this could very much be the 8-9 decision. And as it stands right now, so this would be, I think, the 8. I think Tennessee is going to be the 8 or the 9. I don't even know I think that's locked in.
Seems like it.
We get into like the Penn State Ohio State discussion would determine, but I think Tennessee is going to be in an 8-9 game against a Northern team. The question is, where is it going to be? So right now in the AP poll, Tennessee is 6th in both the AP and the coaches, actually, and Ohio State is 7th and 8th in the AP and the coaches. I am fairly convinced that Ohio State will be ahead of Tennessee in the playoff rankings, though, because do you agree with that?
I do. Yeah.
I think pollsters are dumb, but I think there is a pretty indisputable case for Ohio State to be ranked ahead of Tennessee. Tennessee's best win is against Alabama, who might be a playoff team. Ohio State has wins over 2 playoff teams in Penn State and Indiana. Tennessee has a loss to Georgia by 14 So they have a loss to a good team. Ohio State has a loss to Oregon by 1. And Tennessee has an upset loss to a 6-6 Arkansas team. And Ohio State has an upset loss to a 7-5 Michigan team. So they have very similar loss resumes, but Ohio State clearly has better wins. And I just think pollsters are stupid, and Ohio State's loss was more recent. I don't think there's any way the committee in the end, and both those teams are done. So whatever, as Ohio State compared to Tennessee, whatever happens on this Tuesday is going to be what it's going to be in the final rankings too. And I'm like 95% sure Ohio State's going to be ahead.
Yeah, I think so. And you stack the wins and losses, I think Ohio State wins. If you look at all the metrics that ESPN always spouts, like the strength of record, strength of schedule, game control, all those things, it's close, but Ohio State's ahead in all of them. And also Ohio State has an opportunity for its resume to be strengthened even further if Penn State beats Oregon. I guess Ohio State probably makes out well either way there, because those two teams are good and playing each other, and Ohio State played them both. But if Ohio State has a win over a Penn State team that then goes and beats Oregon in the Big Ten championship, then that's in Ohio State's favor too. So I've seen a lot of number 9 Ohio State at number 8 Tennessee. I just don't agree with it. Maybe we'll be proven wrong on Tuesday night when the rankings come out, but I'm pretty confident that Ohio State's going to be ahead of Tennessee.
Yeah, it's not that we don't agree with it. It's that we just don't think there's a chance the committee is going to do that.
Yeah.
Based on how the committee has discussed and ranked other teams so far. And it's like, I don't care what the polls say because the polls are stupid.
Yeah.
Next question, the Mountain West champ versus the Big 12 champ. Boise State is ahead of both Arizona State and Iowa State at this point. It's a matter of, do you believe that being a ranked game in the Big 12 title game would propel the winner ahead of Boise State? And I do think there is some, you get into some schedule strength argument here. But that Big 12 champ is only going to have 2 losses. So it's not going to be a 3-loss Big 12 champ. A 3-loss Big 12 champ versus a 1-loss Boise State, I think, is very different. I am not sure what's going to happen, but I still absolutely think it's possible that the Big 12 champ gets propelled past Boise State. And the issue that matters here is that it is the last bye is going to be either the Big 12 champ or the Mountain West champ. It's if UNLV beats Boise State, it's the Big 12 champ for sure, I think. Do you agree with that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what do you think of the argument? Do you think it is a compelling, clear argument one way or the other for the Big 12 or Boise State? And again, this matters for a bye.
I don't know that it's like, I don't know why people are have been so certain that Boise would be ahead of the Big 12 champ, but clearly they are. And the committee has ranked the teams as such. I don't quite understand it, because it's not like Boise has steamrolled its way through the Mountain West. Like it's played some close games, right? And I know it played Oregon very tough in the beginning of the year. I also think if those two teams played tomorrow, it would go a little differently. So I'm not saying Boise's bad, but I think the road through the Big 12 is just much more difficult than the road that Boise State has had to go through. And even if you have teams there with 2 losses, I would have those teams ahead of Boise. But based off how they're ranked, I actually don't know that jump would happen. So I'm anticipating that if Boise wins the Mountain West Championship on Friday night, that it will be one of the top 4 seeds.
So here's the other thing that I think also matters. I don't think then there had been a lot of assumptions along the way. Just so people know this, what is guaranteed is that the 4 best champs get buys, and that the best champ from the group of 5 gets in. So that's what's guaranteed. But a lot of times, every preseason model always had the group of 5 champ that gets in as the 12th seed. I actually think the 12 seed's going to be the SEC team or Miami or SMU, maybe, that gets in. I don't know that I think that the Big 12 champ, if Boise's the 4 seed, I don't know that I think the Big 12 champ's going to be the 12 seed.
Yeah, I think I'd agree with that. I think it'd be the 11. Yeah.
So anyway, we're just throwing this stuff out there so people are aware of it. And this is the last one I think that is a discussion that really matters, is what is Indiana's seed going to be? Because the thing that this would make the perfect bracket. The perfect bracket for me is north-south games throughout the bracket. It is not Indiana playing at Penn State or Ohio State. Indiana at Notre Dame, I can get behind, because it's an in-state thing and it is super weird. And like Notre Dame's had rivalries and has played games over history with Purdue and with Michigan and with Michigan State, but it has not had that with Indiana, right? So like that it would just be super weird and crazy, but it's not what I would pick. What I would pick is these North-South matchups. So I think
Indiana and Notre Dame haven't played since 1991, and before that, they hadn't played since 1958.
So like that's where like it would be wild. It would be wild for the state of Indiana. So I'm not against that. I'm against Indiana, Penn State, and I'm against Indiana, Ohio State, just because it wouldn't be as fun.
Mm-hmm.
I want Indiana, as it turns out, to play at the SEC title game loser. Like that's kind of what I want to happen, because I think Indiana is going to be the 10 or the 11. And then I think the SEC title game loser is going to be the 6 or the 7.
Mm-hmm.
So there are brackets that you can find right now that has Georgia as the 7 and Indiana as the 10. And then everything else, right? You get like that 8-9 game that might be Ohio State, Tennessee. You get some like either SMU or Alabama or Miami versus Penn State kind of stuff. You get that, whether it's Boise or Arizona State or Iowa State versus what. I kind of want Indiana to play at Georgia. So it depends. Yeah. Like that's it. And it doesn't mean that I think that Indiana is going to go beat Georgia at Georgia, but like that just would be fun. Right. And it would also be my two props would come together.
Would you go to that?
In my hat.
Would you go to that if it happened?
It's really hard because I feel like I want to be in the North.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I wish that, like, when we get to the home playoff games, we're going to wish that we could split the two of us in half so we could be at all 4 games. But like, how could you not be at Ohio State, Tennessee, like an SEC coming into the shoe, an SEC team coming into the shoe? But we've been saying all along that like the ultimate home playoff atmosphere is Beaver Stadium. How can you not be at Penn State?
Yeah,
for that? Especially if it's like Iowa State, Penn State, like how could we not be at that? But also how could we, if it is, I don't know. I think it's going to be hard to be at Georgia, Indiana, because I think we need to be in the North. Mm-hmm. But anyway, like, do you have a hand? I think Indiana is going to be the 10 or the 11. And then what actually matters to me is that as long as it matches up with the SEC loser being the 6 or the 7, that's what I care about. But where do you think Indiana will be seated?
Yeah, 10 or 11. I don't think they'll be at 12. My guess is 10. I wouldn't be surprised by 11. My guess is 10.
Okay. That would actually make me mad because I don't know, like Indiana's in, I think, by every reasonable person. So then to like squeeze Alabama in at the last minute, but then be like, well, I actually think Alabama would beat Indiana in a hypothetical game. So we'll put Indiana 12 and Alabama 11, or you know what I mean? Like I think Indiana's the 10 or the 11. So anyway, okay. Does that help? Did we help people? Did we help like set up how people should be thinking about the bracket?
I think we did. Are we, do we have a break plan before the South Cram-o-Meter?
Yes.
Okay, good. Because my AirPods are going to die. Switch them out.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Oh, we don't want to miss you. We wouldn't want you to miss the Cram-o-Meter. You've been doing so much research. I can't imagine what your Cram-o-Meter number is going to be this week. I'm
actually, I'm going to disappoint you. I'm a little more subdued this week.
Yeah. But I'm sure you have a reason for the cram. Just there's a reason. There's a reason for the cram. The reason is all that matters. All right. Break. Maybe a slightly longer break than usual for Landis to switch out his AirPods. And then we will be back with the South Cram-o-Meter and tipping our cap to Northern teams who finished strong on Kings of the North. Back on Kings of the North. We appreciate you guys being here. Sorry, I'm a little it's the price of it was 7. It was 7, Landis, in Ames, Iowa. They said it felt like 7, and it did feel like 7.
Yeah, I mean, it was cold. It was cold here in Columbus too.
It was cold in the Midwest.
You looked chilly on your little video updates on your way back to the hotel. It looked quite cold.
I didn't live stream the whole walk, but it was but it was a little bit cold. I was trying to say I actually think it maybe felt a little bit colder at the Iowa game on Friday night, but who knows? Iowa cold is Iowa cold. And so all I care about is the South coming up to experience that and to experience some northern cold. If you guys want to give us a thumbs up, if you want to subscribe, if you want to tell a friend, we certainly would be appreciative of that. Like, we are going to be talking about the playoff, and we're going to be doing a lot. We're not going to forget about the rest of our northern teams as we prepare for the playoffs. So we'll talk about bowls. We'll talk about how seasons went. We want to be all encompassing for everybody who cares about northern football. And I think if you care about northern football, if your teams, that's what I would hope for this season, Landis, is that in trying to develop or, just embrace a northern college football community, if your team's not in the playoff, then I would hope, and people were doing this probably anyway, and you don't have to shout Big Ten, you don't have to shout KOTN, but I just hope, if you're a West Virginia fan who's a little bit mad about how the season went, or a Pitt fan, or a Cincinnati fan, and it kind of ended a little bit weird, or a Minnesota fan, and it was like a pretty good year, but man, it could have been a little bit better. I mean, great finish. Or a Wisconsin fan that's a little mad, root for Penn State to beat us an SEC team, root for Indiana to do something. If you're watching Tennessee, Ohio State, and you think to yourself, man, I hate Ohio State because I'm a Big Ten fan and I play them, just hate Tennessee a little bit more. Can we encourage that, Landis? It's not that you should stop disliking the northern teams that your team plays and has maybe had exciting, interesting games with over the years that make you mad. But just in these specific moments, you don't have to diminish your hate of your northern opponents and rivals, but just save some hate for the South, and specifically in the moment for 3 hours, hate them a little bit more.
I think it's not too much to ask for. I actually was, though, talking to a friend of mine who's an SEC fan, who said that that sentiment doesn't exist a whole lot anymore in the SEC. There's not, Alabama fans aren't going to be rooting for Tennessee to beat Ohio State. I think the South would like everyone that's not their own team to lose. So it is. I think it's a hard barrier to break through.
What about the SEC chants? They don't do the SEC chants anymore?
I don't think not as much. No, I think Oklahoma and Texas have done them because they don't know any better. But I don't know. I don't know if the camaraderie is quite as strong down there anymore. I think there's a coalition when they feel like they're going to get left out. But once they're there, I don't know that they're cheering for the other SEC teams.
Because maybe then what it turns out they were doing the whole time was just glomming on to Saban.
Yeah. I think that's true. Yeah, they were trying to prop themselves up with Nick Saban's success.
Yeah. And so now there isn't such a beacon of light for them to try to absorb. Hey, we're in the same conference as those guys. That means they're rolling everybody. That means we're good too, which it never meant. Right. So they were they were trying to hoodwink us the whole time. We thought it was Southern culture and camaraderie, and it was just glomming on and hoodwinking. Landis, how dare they?
What are the little fish that swim alongside the great white remora fish? Is that what they're called?
Yeah.
That's what the rest of the SEC was. Nick Saban was the great white shark.
Oh my God. Hey, Elaine, Lane, do you feel like you were like a remora fish there glomming on to Saban?
Yeah.
Oh,
you know what remora fish aren't? They're not sharks, no matter how much they'd like to be one.
But I'm not asking northern fans I don't want northern fans to be a remora fish. I want northern fans to be a school, right? We're a school. We swim together. So let's swim together and kill Southern remora fish. Because the whole point is the South lost its shark. So I don't want to say kill Southern sharks because there are no more Southern sharks. Anyway, the Southern Shark's going to coach at West Virginia. Do you want to cram stuff? You want to cram? You want to cram?
Let's cram it. Yeah.
Did you feel like it was a crammy Southern weekend?
No, there were times where maybe it was trending that way when Georgia and Georgia Tech were going shot for shot in overtime, or when Vanderbilt returned the opening kickoff against Tennessee 100 yards for a touchdown and was leading 14-0. But then it kind of settled in, right? Tennessee won, Georgia won, Bama won the Iron Bowl, Ole Miss won the Egg Bowl. There were like no shenanigans that I can recall from the Egg Bowl either. So not super crammy. Even Dabo lost, but then he still got to go to the ACC championship. So yeah, they're fine.
So I think maybe the best cramming was done then on Twitter by Northern King Brett Bielema, who crammed it on Lane Kiffin in a very, very public fashion, right? So do you have a handle on this, Landis? Like Lane Kiffin basically tweeted out, did he tweet out an explanation for why Ole Miss should make the playoff?
Yeah, I think it was like a Facebook post or maybe like a Reddit post where somebody laid out that Alabama and Ole Miss had beaten South Carolina, so South Carolina should be removed from the conversation. And then they were doing math about how much Ole Miss had won by in its games and how much and lost by, like the score differential in those games, totally ignoring whatever the losses actually were, like ignoring losing to Kentucky, for instance. Yeah, it wasn't a particularly compelling argument that Lane Kiffin was trying to get out there on behalf of Ole Miss making the playoff.
And then Brett Bielema got on Twitter and stuffed him in a trash can, right?
Mm-hmm. He sure did.
So Brett Bielema, this is the greatest beginning of this tweet. So like Lane Kiffin lays out this whole point about like strength of schedule and what your wins and losses are. And Brett Bielema begins with, "I couldn't agree more, Lane Kiffin," which is great. Like, great point, except the point you're making makes more sense for my team than your team. Mm-hmm. Brett continues, "Here's a thought for the CFB playoff. Ole Miss, number 31 strength of schedule, and has 3 losses to unranked Kentucky, Florida, and 8-4 at LSU. Illinois has number 30 strength of schedule, so better than Ole Miss, and has 3 losses to number 1 Oregon, number 4 Penn State, and a 1-possession game to Minnesota. How about we just take the 12 best teams and see where it goes?" Like, why do you think Brett Bielema did that? But I think like we have to do that because there are some, like I'm on Twitter calling Peter Burns from the SEC Network the stupidest person on the internet. Mm-hmm. And I say that because I actually think Peter Burns of the SEC Network is the stupidest person on the internet. And if you want to clip this out and send it to him, Peter Burns of the SEC Network is the stupidest person on the internet. But I can't tell if he's a troll, a honk, or a moron. My guess is all 3. If he wants to come on this show and say that he's just a troll, I'm just saying stuff to get you riled up, then it's like, so then you're basing your career on just saying stuff you don't believe, like, that's a fine way to make money, you stupid moron. So that would make you a moron too. But nobody cares if I say that Peter Burns of the SEC Network is the stupidest person on the internet. I could say Peter Burns of the SEC Network is the stupidest person on the internet 5 times. And nobody would care. But when Brett Bielema stuffs Lane Kiffin in a trash can doing a version of that thing, I do think the North has to fight back. Because sometimes when I get on Twitter and say Peter Burns of the SEC Network is the stupidest person on the internet, people say he's a troll. He's just doing engagement farming. Why do you bother? And my point is we have to bother. This whole show is bothering. Now, we are not propping up. We are celebrating. They don't need to be propped up. They're doing it on their own. Great Northern ball. We are celebrating Northern ball, but absolutely pushing back against the South is part of it. So when I say Peter Burns of the SEC Network is the stupidest person on the internet, that's pushing back against the South. But when Brett Bielema does it, it matters a gazillion times more. And I'm sort of surprised to see anybody in the North do it, but it's awesome.
Brett gets it though, right? I think he understands.
Yes.
Like, I actually don't know that enough coaches in the North like understand that they need to do that sometimes. And like Lane Kiffin is a cartoon character and he leans into it. And I'm not saying be that necessarily, but don't be afraid to like publicly stump for your program. Kind of thing. I don't think enough of that happens in the North because one, there's like, and you and Godfrey have talked about this, like there's not the media machine that does it for the North, and that like the way that there is for the South and the SEC in particular. So then if that doesn't exist, I guess like outside of this show, then the coaches need to take it upon themselves, and not enough of them do that. So do I agree with Brett Bielema that Illinois should be in the playoff? No. But if Lane Kiffin wants to be out there and make that argument, then Brett Bielema should be out there doing it too.
Yeah. I mean, I think it is very smart to point out that Ole Miss's argument is no better than Illinois' argument. But somehow people, including us, are discussing should Ole Miss be in the mix at 9-3, and nobody is discussing whether Illinois should be in the mix at 9-3.
Mm-hmm.
And like, why is that? So Brett Bielema doing that. So I don't even know, do we even need a Cram-o-Meter this week? Or has Brett Bielema done the cramming and the meter takes a week off? Because we have the meter because we feel like there is not enough cramming taking place elsewhere. This was literally a cram.
Mm-hmm.
So I might pass. Do I pass on my cram rating? Do I give it a 0? Because Brett Bielema standing up for the North has rendered the meter momentarily unnecessary. But you probably have a great number.
Mine was just Lane Kiffin's winning percentage, career winning percentage. It's actually, it's not bad. It's not bad. It's 667. But I would be okay with not doing it this week if in the future, when we come back to the Cram-o-Meter, when we go through all the scores week by week, this week just has a picture of Brett Bielema's face.
Oh, Mike, can you hop in? Could we put a picture of Brett Bielema's face in as a score? Is that something that we would be capable of creating in the graphic?
Of course. Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's run through the Cram-o-Meter by week then, just to reset this for everybody, because it is very important, because it is the official tracking of Northern versus Southern cramming. Week 1, I forgot to do it because I'm not good at my job. Week number 2, 815. Week 3, 975. Week 4, 910. Week 5, we broke the 1 to 1,000 meter for the first time, 1,200. Week 6, 1669. Week 7, 6.5 million. That's going to go down in history, Landis. Come on.
Yeah.
Okay. Week 8, 459,615. Week 9, 652. Like, we don't have to break it every week.
Reasonable.
Week 10, 45,233. Week 11, over 1 million. Week 12, 252,750. Last week, 1.8 million. And officially, week 14, Brett Bielema's face.
Love it.
We're getting him on. We can get him on.
Can we, like, they called Helen of Troy was the face that launched 1,000 ships, right? Brett can be the face that launched 1,000 crams.
Oh my God. Wouldn't he love this discussion?
Yeah.
Because the thing is, he knows what's up. He's been down there.
Right.
That's the thing. Like he went down. You can look at Brett Bielema going from Wisconsin to Arkansas as sort of a failure, or you can look at it as a spy mission that he embedded himself down there.
Mm-hmm.
I'll ask him that. We'll ask him that. Brett, come on. Now you can tell the truth. Were you sent there by Jim Delaney to gather information and then bring it back north?
Brett Bielema, double agent. Yeah.
Now I kind of want to. We really.
There's a spy. There's a spy. We can make a spy movie. Didn't they make a spy movie with like Melissa McCarthy? We can just put Brett Bielema in the Melissa McCarthy role. It was like her and Jude Law. We can just have Brett Bielema and Jude Law.
Yeah. Lane Kiffin's like Jude Law. And then Brett can stuff him, cram him in a trash can. Okay. We love Brett Bielema, Northern King. Let's talk about some Northern teams that behaved as kings in the second half of the year, Landis. You can fall apart in the second half, right? You see teams sort of like give up. And maybe gives up is a strong word, but run out of steam.
It can get away from
right.
Yeah.
It got away from Pitt. Can get away from,
yeah.
It got away from Purdue. Like Purdue had a chance to sort of try to stand up in the second half of the year. And instead it got away from them. Purdue finished, for instance, Purdue was 0-6 in its last 6 games, but its 6th game of the year was the overtime loss to Illinois. And then it was like, oh, maybe there's something here. Maybe they could win 2 or 3 games in the second half and show signs of life. And instead, in the second half, Purdue did take Northwestern to overtime, but otherwise was not competitive. And the result is their coach got fired, right? Like, but you would have thought, I don't know, after the Illinois Purdue game, would you have guessed, hey, I think maybe Purdue's got a little something in them?
Yeah, because that was when like Ryan Walters took over the play calling, and they had was it Ryan Brown at quarterback, and it just felt like they had found something that maybe wasn't going to push them to winning their next 6 games, but maybe it might push them to winning 3 or 4, and it never happened.
Yeah. Okay. So that's an example of like for teams that it didn't happen for. We'll do a little bit more on that in a second. But let's acknowledge, do you know how many teams were 6-0 in the second half in the North?
I don't know.
2. One is Oregon because they finished as the only undefeated team in FBS, and the other is Notre Dame. And this is, what have you thought of? Do you think we are still fairly, as media members, as fans, as most importantly, College Football Playoff Committee members, taking the Northern Illinois loss by Notre Dame into account? Or has it been totally forgotten because they've handled business in such other ways, because so many other teams seem to have a goofy loss here or there? Not as goofy as Northern Illinois. It remains the goofiest, the worst loss in FBS, certainly among playoff contenders. Should we be talking about it more? Or is it that Notre Dame has been so good since then that they deserve credit for somehow wiping it from our memory, and that includes being 6-0 in the second half?
I guess I'm a little surprised that it's not talked about more, but I do think it's just what you said. It's because they've been so impressive since then. They've not. I don't off the top of my head. The most competitive game they've played in might have been last week against USC, right? So, and even that wasn't. That's like a misleading box score a little bit. So they've erased it. It's not the same way that Ohio State erased its loss to Virginia Tech in 2014, because losing to Northern Illinois is worse than losing to Virginia Tech by a wide margin. But it seems like they're getting an awful lot of credit, Notre Dame is. And I don't think it's undeserving for really turning their season around and winning emphatically week after week after week. So like they're up against the best they could ever be in the playoff field is number 5, because they're not in a conference. And they're probably going to finish like 6th. So, yeah, it seems like everyone's giving them respect for the way they've played the last 9 games.
So Notre Dame's first half, they beat Texas A&M in the opener, which is a big deal. They come back and lose to Northern Illinois. Then they beat Purdue and Miami, a MAC team. They play a 1-score game with Louisville, and then they beat a terrible Stanford team. So that's their first half. There is a nice win in there, but there's a terrible loss, and the rest is kind of like, eh. And then the second half, 31-13, 51-14, 52-3, 35-14, 49-14, 49-35 USC. So Georgia Tech, Navy, Florida State, Virginia, Army, USC. Like they really have been mostly dominant, and they deserve credit for that. And I don't know, like sometimes the South, when they're complaining about stuff, like pops up and says it. I do think we are in an era of we'll give you one bad game, right? I do think that's okay.
Yeah, it seems like
but,
it. Yeah.
But like Ole Miss has had 3 bad games. And even like Georgia, it's like, well, they have some good wins. They lost to some good teams, but they have a 1-point win over Kentucky. They got taken to 8 overtimes by Georgia Tech. Like they have other close calls that we can go back to a resilience versus vulnerable discussion. But like Notre Dame really hasn't had a bad game. They've had one. They had one terrible game.
I haven't looked this up, but I wonder how long has Notre Dame trailed since losing to Northern Illinois?
Yeah, so I think like all of that matters. And then like you watch Alabama, and it's like they have 3 losses, and they've also had some goofy stuff. And then Ohio State looks so good for much of the year, but you lose to Michigan, and like that's certainly not as bad as losing to Northern Illinois, but it shows that you're vulnerable. So the idea that I think Notre Dame is like a modern representation of the 12-team playoff. And I do think that's a big distinction, that what we have been fighting against, I think, most of the year is making sure we don't ignore multiple games where SEC playoff contenders are losing or looking super vulnerable while winning. But if it's just one, it doesn't mean you ignore it, but it's not the same thing as that one game. That's been my point. I don't think one loss should ruin your season. But then the SEC took that and made it like, I don't think 3 losses should be definitive about who you are. And it's like, that is a quarter of your schedule. That is definitive. But I think this is the exact example of what's good about the 12-team playoff, what Notre Dame has done.
It's not merely the 3 losses either. It's the 3 losses, and then in the other 9 games, like still not playing your absolute best, right? Like if Notre Dame had lost to Northern Illinois and then was like 28-24ing its way to an 11-1 record, it wouldn't be ranked where it is. I think we'd be having conversations about whether or not Notre Dame should be left out of the playoff at 11-1, if that were the case. But they've just turned it around and destroyed everybody. It's the same conversation as Indiana. Like the strength of schedule is what it is, and Notre Dame's is probably maybe better than Indiana's. I don't know. But they just make the games non-competitive for most of them. So that has to mean something.
Yeah, really good. All right, those are our 2 6-0 teams in the second half, 5-1 teams in the second half in the North. These are teams, again, that's not super surprising, but like Colorado, I think we have to, again, like just acknowledge what Colorado did. 5-1 in the second half. Penn State lost to Ohio State, got it together. Indiana lost to Ohio State and then handled business every other week. And it's like, I almost like didn't put Ohio State on this list because I don't know that we would put Ohio State in a finishing strong category, but they were 5-1 in the second half. Like that's just a fact. But certainly what they did in week 14 and game 12 fits no definition of finishing strong. But these are the 4 teams that were 5-1. I think Colorado is the most interesting here.
Yeah, I think Colorado is a team that I'm maybe like most bummed is not going to get a shot to take a swing in the playoff, just because I'd like to see what that would have looked like. So Colorado's the most interesting. It was I thought year 2 under Dion was going to be better. It was way better than I could have ever imagined it. And then to win, I know that it didn't break their way to get into the Big 12 championship. But was it 52-0 in their last game? It's like that's a heck of a way to put an exclamation point in your regular season. Yeah,
I such credit to all those Big 12 teams that 4 teams tied for first going in the last week and they all won.
Yeah.
And so that Colorado and BYU didn't get there, but that Colorado just absolutely undressed Oklahoma State on Friday, and that BYU, of course, they're still going to care, but Houston's pulled some upsets this year, and that BYU, like what they did really mattered, because if BYU and Houston got within 1 score late, if BYU would have lost that game, Colorado would be in the Big 12 championship game.
Yeah.
So like it really mattered, and BYU like pushed itself all the way down the stretch, even though their dreams they knew were dashed before that game. I give BYU a lot of credit for going out and playing hard and finishing with a really good season. These are the teams that finished 4-2 in the last 6 games, and these are really the teams that I want to give some credit here. Syracuse 4-2, they won their last 3. That's a great finish by Syracuse, and I want to talk about them. Minnesota 4-2 down the stretch. Iowa State, to get into the Big 12 title game, 4-2 down the stretch, won their last 3 after a 2-game losing streak. They really rallied when they could have fallen off a cliff. Kansas had a really bad week 14, but still 4-2 down the stretch, including 3 straight wins over ranked teams. Iowa, huge quarterback problems, but like did not fall apart. And they won their last 2 games. They finished 7-4 by going 4-2 in the second half when they absolutely could have been teetering. Illinois 4-2 in the second half, won 3 straight to end the year after that loss to Minnesota, where it was like, are they teetering? No, they're not teetering. Rutgers 4-2 in the second half with all those injuries. Landis, they won 3 of their last 4 after a 4-game losing streak.
Mm-hmm.
So they had a good start. They lost 4 in a row, and then they won 3 of their final 4. And then BYU again, they were undefeated. So it's like their second half is not as good as their first half, but they didn't completely let it get away, and they showed up in the last week of the regular season. Let's talk about Syracuse first. This season for Syracuse is just fabulous, and I'm so excited for what those fans got to experience, and they kept it going when after we saw them live against Pitt on a Thursday night and Kyle McCord throws 5 picks, it felt like maybe their season was going to explode.
Yeah, they went 4-1 from there, right? With the only loss being to Boston College, they probably feel like they should have won that game. They lost it on the road. Had a really good overtime win against Virginia Tech. They had to come back right into that game, and they won it in overtime the week after losing to Pitt. Went all the way out to Cal and won there. The UConn game was weird, but they won. So I guess it's all that matters. And then they got one of the best wins of the season and one of the more exciting games of the season when they beat Miami. Saturday. So that was awesome. It's a great year one for Fran Brown. I know maybe at some point they might take a step back and think to themselves like, man, wish we could have beaten Stanford, wish we could have beaten BC and put ourselves in the ACC title race. In some ways it does feel like a bit of a missed opportunity, but I know you had your eyes on that too when the season started. I don't think that's whatever should have defined success or not success for this team, right? So this was an incredibly successful year.
Yeah. Rutgers, it felt like it was going off the rails. Mm-hmm. And this to me is the kind of thing when I think about, because Bill O'Brien and Boston College didn't quite make this list. Boston College finished 3-3, but they won 3 of their last 4 when it felt like they could have gone off the rails. And when I talk about what I think maybe Rich Rodriguez could do at West Virginia, I think when you have your feet firmly planted at a place that you have a connection to and that you love, that's the kind of thing that when you love a place that you know you're not leaving, right? You're not doing it for yourself because you're trying to get a good record so your agent can get you a raise and get you a better job. You're doing it because this is your home. And I thought the way Boston College and Rutgers both finished the season is the kind of thing that would make me potentially enthused about Rich Rodriguez at West Virginia, because I thought what Rutgers did to finish 4-2 and win 3 of their last 4 after a 4-game losing streak was awesome.
I thought it was really good. I didn't have much confidence that it was going to happen, and I think over that stretch too, they got some reward on what I initially questioned a little bit with the quarterback spot, with like bringing in Ethan Kaliak-Manis and getting rid of Gavin Wimsatt. Like Ethan Kaliak-Manis down the stretch had some pretty good moments to help fuel that strong finish. So I just, it speaks to, I guess, the culture that Greg Schiano has there, right? Like it's the reason he's there is to power Rutgers through some of the injuries they faced this year and have it finish with what they finished 8-4, right? So strong, like maybe a game or two short of what they thought they might do if they were healthy throughout the whole year, but a strong season nonetheless.
And I thought Iowa football, they had a really kind of goofy game where they went up to Michigan State, and it just was a weird game, and Michigan State was off a bye week, but Iowa was 4-2 going into that game, and then went and lost at Michigan State. It was like, oh, like, is this going to get away from them? But then they won 4 of their last 5. And the loss was at UCLA on a Friday night when their quarterback got hurt. And also, like, the defense didn't play very well in that game. But they beat Northwestern, Wisconsin, Maryland, and Nebraska down the stretch, playing Jackson Stratton, who's like a 4th-string quarterback. I was told, by the way, and I had repeated it on this show, apparently, like, the whole, like, Jackson Stratton was a linebacker at one point. That was wrong. That was like a different guy. And like the TV guys just got it wrong at some point. Yeah,
Jackson Stratton was like a lower level quarterback who transferred He's Iowa,
like a Colorado State. Yeah. So he's a quarterback the whole way. Anyway, I talked to Jackson Stratton after the game on Friday night. Like, that win, that was such a Iowa beating Nebraska in that way was such an example of like where Iowa is and where Nebraska is not. And Iowa finished 4-2 in the second half, and Nebraska finished 1-5. Mm-hmm. And so I think I had suggested a bet at the beginning of the year that if you pushed the alternate win totals to like 9 wins or more for both Iowa and Iowa State and make both bets, I think they were both plus 250 or something. And just if you win 1, you win money and you have a shot at 2. Iowa State wins 10 games and Iowa wins 8. And that the Cy-Hawk that could have gone either way is kind of a flip game there in a lot of ways. Mm-hmm. But that's some really good football in the state of Iowa, which is why I was glad to be there on Friday and Saturday night. But that's a nice 8-4 year for Iowa that, again, I think if your coach is not Kirk Ferentz, and if you don't have buy-in from guys like Jay Higgins, who's going to go down as one of the greatest Hawkeyes of all time, that's a season that could have gotten away. And instead they won 4 of their last 5.
Yeah, I think so. And I think they got, for the most part, what they wanted out of Tim Lester, right? Was we said they got to go moving forward now, figure out the quarterback stuff. But that was an Iowa football season, right? And which is like a compliment. That's what they do. So I thought it was strong. I was, we were tossing around playoff Iowa before the year just because of the schedule, just because of how the schedule set up. So like I don't want to pretend like we weren't having those conversations, which at the time I actually didn't think were unreasonable. So Was it the best possible Iowa season? I would say no, but I still think it was a pretty good one.
Yeah. So like you lose the Cy-Hawk game by a point and then you go lose at Ohio State. And so that was certainly possible. But then like you have that goofy loss in the middle of the year and it's like, okay, like that's it. Because they would have had to run the table, be a 10-2 team. And they might have been. Like if they were a 10-2 team with losses to 2 playoff teams, if Iowa State wins the Big 12, they're in the mix. So that Michigan State loss takes them out of that. That changes what the peak of their season can be. And that's how they begin the second half with this weird loss. But then it doesn't become 5-7. It doesn't become 6-6.
Yeah.
That's what it's like. If you go back, it's like, man, how do you go lose that game? But it did not torpedo you. Here are the people who did get torpedoed. We had a lot of teams in the North that finished 1-5 in the second half, and it just is not great. Pitt lost 5 straight to end the year. We want to do, I think we'll call them performance reviews of every team. We talked a lot about Pitt when they were good. We have not talked about Pitt a ton as they've fallen off a cliff. Offensive line injuries are real. Quarterback injuries are real. But I think we have to dig in and examine a little bit more. Like, that's not great.
No, it's definitely not great. I don't know if that, like, the injuries are the injuries. I wonder if anything got figured out, too, with, like, how to stop that offense that Cade Bell was bringing over here, which is, like, maybe that's not unheard of in the first year of installing a system, but I don't think you can explain all of it away with just the injuries.
Yeah. Cincinnati finished 1-5. We know their schedule got tough, but they had a show me who you are game at home in the snow against TCU on Saturday to make a bowl and didn't win. So 1-5. There's some stuff in there, and we talked about there's stuff in there you can explain, but 1-5 should have been better than that. And if they get one more win, they go to a bowl. That's really rough.
Yeah, a couple close ones in there too, right? Nail baiters that probably should not have been flipped the way they were flipped.
I think that puts Scott Satterfield squarely in the questionable status heading into next year.
Yeah, I think it definitely does.
Utah finished 1-5. They won their finale against UCF, but this is just it did get away from them. But now, listen, it got away from them in results. We did talk about they fought their butts off against BYU. They really did try to compete in some games, but they were so hurt, and it's just so weird. Credit to them for fighting and winning the last one, but still 1-5 is rough.
1-5 is rough. It was kind of ugly with the Andy Ludwig thing, the injury to Cam Rising and how that was handled. Like it wasn't always smooth, but they did play. Like I never thought that like the defense just like quit, and I think the defense propped them up quite a bit, and it was nice to see them get a win in the last one at least.
Yeah. 2 second-year coaches with a lot of hope and hype both went 1-5 down the stretch. Nebraska and Wisconsin, and Nebraska's only win in that stretch was over Wisconsin. Nebraska did get that win to make a bowl game at 6-6, so that's an accomplishment for them. But they were 1-5 they were 5-1 in the first half and 1-5 in the second half, and that Iowa loss is bad. So they're going to get bowl practice. There's going to be some momentum around the bowl, but also that was a terrible loss to end the year and sucked a lot of the air out of the room when the win the week before had kind of given them life.
I really thought that win against Wisconsin that got them to bowl eligibility was just going to like release the shackles and have Nebraska just playing like loose and fun and confident. And then it went to Iowa City and it was none of those things.
And then Wisconsin was worse. Wisconsin was 5-2 and then lost its last 5. Now, that included losses to Penn State and Oregon, and they had a chance to beat Oregon. So that's weird to sort of throw that in. But they also lost by 32 to Iowa. They lost by 19 to Nebraska, and they lost by 17 to Minnesota. So that's like 3 big rivals that they really didn't compete with in the second half. They fired their offensive coordinator, and they missed the bowl. That's bad. Like that's a terrible finish for Wisconsin, acknowledging there was like a tough schedule stretch in there and they deserved a lot of credit. It's just weird that they could play that well against Oregon and then carry over none of it into the games that were actually winnable.
Well, I think it was. I don't know if that was just like deflating, right? To play, they played their best game on defense. They didn't play their best game on offense, but they played their best game on defense, and it wasn't enough. And then they fired the offensive coordinator, and then it's like, well, then it'll never be enough. So like that, then you just probably don't have the proper mindset to go out there and play your best to close out the season. So it was a really rough year for Luke Fickell. He's not. You said like Scott Satterfield is in a little bit of a hot spot now. Maybe Luke's not quite there, but maybe he is. I don't know. Like he's got to nail the offensive coordinator hire. He's got to get Wisconsin pointed back in the right direction because Wisconsin does not lose, and they're not going to a bowl game for the first time since 2001.
Yeah, and then two other teams that finished 1-5 again. Like this is a lot of teams. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Northern teams that went 1-5 in the second half. The other two are Northwestern and Maryland. Maryland beat USC by a point to avoid an 0-6 second half, and Northwestern beat Purdue in overtime to avoid an 0-6 second half. We get it. I don't know that anybody expected great seasons for those programs, but they both were bowl teams a year ago, and they just absolutely finished leaking all the way home.
Yeah, it's so like David Braun, it's not great in your second year. Right? Had a ton of momentum coming into this year, so that's disheartening. They got to figure out their quarterback and offense situation as well. And I think it leaves Mike Locksley in a really tough spot at Maryland too, because not only did they leak out towards the end of the year, but then they played Penn State and got their doors blown off, right? And it's not that's happened a lot in that game, as we said going into it. It's not like Maryland has been consistently competitive there, but to have that be the sort of like final nail to lose that way, to have Mike Locksley, I think like, I don't know. I didn't think it was the best look for him to act the way that he acted after that Penn State game either. So that's an interesting spot, I think, too.
Yeah. Okay. So we tipped some caps and then we called some teams out, which again, we're not gonna blow smoke here. Oh man. Wow. Northwestern really just fought. Now I went 1-5 down the stretch. What are you gonna do? We'll be back on Tuesday. We are going to preview all of the conference title games this week. We are going to talk about recruiting this week because National Signing Day is on Wednesday, and we will do some of that recruiting talk on Tuesday. We're not going to pretend that we are recruiting experts with all the ins and outs of everybody's decision, but we do look at the sport in a different way. And so we'll talk about some North versus South recruiting things. We'll talk about some big victories in recruiting for Northern teams, some places where maybe the South came up and pulled some guys out of the North that Northern teams really should be keeping home. So we'll do that. And then we'll have Big 10 championship game preview, Big 12 championship game preview, MAC championship preview, Mountain West championship preview, and we'll even touch on some stuff from the South. Big week here on Kings of the North. Thanks as always to our producer, Mike Urostowski, for making us look good and sound good. Hopefully I'll sound better as we get through the week. Like if Mike could have auto-tuned me the whole show, that might have worked. But in the meantime, I'll do the best I can. And we'll just let Philly Billy and the firm of the North really handle the business here on KOTN. For Bill Landis, I'm Doug Lesmerises, and that was Kings of the North.